and to try and take my love of the notion of feedback loops and to take it forward. And so to a little bit, that's what I'm trying to do now. So I tried to organize what we're doing tonight in some layers that make sense. And if you notice, the email that I sent out had a particular order about the who was going to talk. And then I discovered after I emailed it that that was the wrong order. So we changed it a few minutes ago because we do things just in time. That's how we move. That's how we roll. I think that's how the kids call it this nowadays. Yeah. So my talk is going to be about, I've had a tremendous opportunity over the past couple of years to learn about that buzzword lean startup. Lean startup, how many people have heard lean startup? How many people are tired of hearing about it? Okay, yeah, there's one. All right, good, two, good. That's good. There's buzz, there's hype. The hype cycle is, we're right in the middle of it, that's great. However, there is some really interesting things there for us to learn from. I've had the opportunity to work with some folks who have lived through a lot of this, have actually applied it, and I've tried to apply it both in the current job that I'm in and previously when I was at 5 Runs. I desperately tried to learn some things at the last minute to apply, and in case you know what 5 Runs is, you'll know how successful I was at that. So having said that, in the work that we've been doing at Food on the Table, I've begun to notice a number of patterns when I would describe to people, as I've been talking about what we do and why they should come work with us and how we work, a number of commonalities. And so I wanted to share those with you tonight. And as just sort of a basic primer. All of this material, what I'm going to show you is a quick summary. I actually have posted all this in more depth online at my site, stevesanderson.com. You can find a link there that says some patterns of lean startup and Food on the Table. This is not an authoritative statement. It's not refined. It's messy, but it's a snapshot. So, where I wanted to start was here. If you probably have had similar experiences I've had, this is sort of the goal when it comes to planning a product. Everything's nicely, neatly cut. You fit it all together. Stacks really nicely. Very, very systematic, methodological. This is the other extreme, the one that we're all supposed to be running away from when we do this. You know, it's just a huge mess of what we want, how we're going to do it, and more importantly, what are we going to do next? The truth is, I believe there's these two represent extremes, and the way we've been working finds another alternative. It's pretty tree. The idea here is that what you do next and how you choose what to work on next is an organic process that grows from where you are at the point in time. You can't predict it well in advance, nor is it chaotic. So, what we do at Food on the Table is we continually run live experiments with our users to see what works. And it's not as bloody as it sounds, no one's actually hurt. But what we do is we take our users and we run them through different alternatives and we measure success or failure based on other metrics. So we gather lots and lots of metrics, and I mean a lot of metrics. If you guys want to know what the subtitle of this talk was pitched to me as by someone, it is that I love metrics, and this is true. Lastly, in order to have that take effect, to continuously learn, to run those experiments constantly, to move as soon as we have a learning, we continually deploy. And we do that buzzword, continuous deployment, that everybody talks about. Now let me go down a specific example. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to pull out about 9 different patterns about how we work. And instead of talking about the patterns, I'm going to show you the patterns with some cute picture. The pictures are not intended to represent actual reality. This chart I got off of Google. It has nothing to do with our company. It's intended to illustrate an idea. But at the bottom of each slide, hopefully you guys can see it in the back, is basically an example of what we're doing when we apply this pattern. So I'm going to tell you a story in the process of going through the next 9 slides. So at Food on the Table, we started by having some key business metrics defined. That was defined in the business model. Now, how those get defined and agreed to, completely separate conversation. Let's assume for the moment you've bought into the idea that retention is an important issue for the company that you're building, the software as a service company you're building. It is for us. We're building a consumer product We want moms, dads, grandpa, grandma. We want our consumers to come in, use the service, and continually return. Ultimately, we intend to monetize them and make money off it. So retention, we pick a metric and we focus on that. We focus on it in terms of, well, for instance, in our case, we had users retaining at single digits. And by retention, I meant, did they come back 2, 3, 4 more times to do a whole nother cycle of work through the site. So if you're familiar with Food on the Table, you'll know this, but essentially what we do is we help people do meal planning. If they're an existing user, they log in, tell us their preferences for this week. We help them compose a meal plan by selecting recipes. We give them a grocery list that's customized around the items that are on sale in their store. We let them edit it, they print it out, they send it to their iPhone, and they're done. Retention for us means how many times have we gotten someone to do that week after week. If someone comes and does it once, they're a new user. If they do it twice, they retain once, and so forth. The more we gather that number up, the better. So we have goals. We want to get that out of the single digits into the double digits. That's good, right? And the reason we want to do that is because the business model says so, and the spreadsheets say then we'll make money. Okay, take that as a given. So in this example, we're focused on retention. Well, we looked at our retention numbers at a recent history, and we said, you know, it sucks. It's like in very low single digit, and it needs to be much higher. So we asked the most basic question: what is it that's stopping us from having that number go up? So we looked through the metrics that we had. We looked through all the event data we had in our system, and we determined that users who come to our site who successfully retain multiple times have done 3 things. They've seen the meal plan, they've picked recipes, and they've seen the grocery list. Those 3 things aren't important, but in our case, those were the important things for our users. What we discovered is that users who saw all 3 of those tended to retain high. Users who didn't retain well. We noticed that of those 3, the thing that they weren't doing the most was the grocery list. Users would get to essentially, you know, the 2nd or 3rd page, and they would never move on to the next page. We saw that in the event log data, and we even saw that when we had users come into our office. We paid them to come in from Craigslist, sit them down, and watch them for an hour, use the service, which is an incredibly painful process. And we'd see these moms, because we screened for very specific demographic. They'd get to the meal plan page, they'd add recipes, they'd be like, oh, this is great, I can see what's on sale, this is awesome, I love it. And then they'd say things like, you know what would be really cool is if you like had this grocery list, and this is actually, I'm saying it like this, we actually had someone say it like this. You could like have this grocery list, and it could like have your items that you like are gonna buy for your recipes, and it could be like organized by your department, and you could like print it out or send it to your phone. That'd be so cool. And of course we had that, it was the next page. She's staring at the meal plan, at which point she hit the print button on the browser, and she's like, okay, I'm done. Clearly we had failed to communicate to her that there was another page to go to. That was our biggest obstacle at that moment in time to increasing retention. How did we come to that conclusion? As I mentioned, we sliced and diced historical data. You guys like my chef here? Food on the table. Get that? We use state-of-the-art tools, the MySQL, the Excel, the Google Analytics, and we correlate stuff. It's an ugly exercise, and it takes a lot of work, and it really helps to have someone that is a seriously good jockey with a spreadsheet. That's really, really valuable. So we discovered those correlations. Where did we get the data? We have metrics on everything. We measure the size of your dog's back, the rotation of the gears, and your clothes. We measure absolutely everything we can think of. And we started by measuring very little. As we went, we discovered we need to measure more. And now every time we make a code change, we are always asking ourselves, what do we measure when we do this? And if you follow the lean startup methodology, the big pitch is you never do anything until you absolutely need it. And the place where that rule is the exception is in gathering metrics data about activity. Because by the time you need that data, it's too late. You should have been logging it for the last 6 months so that you can see your user's behavior and run all those correlations. And if you didn't, you can't go back in time. We haven't solved that problem. At that point, when you know you have to focus in an area and you haven't gathered metrics, you then have to stop focusing on the most important thing in your company, build out the metrics, and then shift to focus on the second most important thing and hope you have metrics there. What you end up doing is playing round robin and chasing after your metrics. So spend the time, instrument your system, and there's lots and lots of free alternatives. Kissmetrics is a good one. Ash is going to talk about some.
Kissmetrics is not free.
Kissmetrics is not free, you're right. In fact, that's part of the reason we dropped them. Ash is going to talk about some stuff. We can certainly talk about lots of alternatives. Key is start gathering clicks, views, controllers. When controllers finish their request cycle, when they receive requests, when models do whatever, when delayed jobs run, when emails are sent, log everything. All right, so you've gathered all this data, you figured out where your obstacle is. In our case, we know that we can't get people from the meal plan page to the grocery list page, even when we're standing there, and even when they say, it'd be great if you had a grocery list page. It just doesn't happen. So our hypothesis is users don't know there's a grocery list page. So we start with a hypothesis. That's a key thing that we do. We don't start with a solution. We don't start with a fix. We start with a really succinct definition, a really succinct statement of what do we think the hypothesis is. Hypothesis in this case was we don't think users know there's a grocery list when they're looking at the meal plan page. So then the question is, how do you solve that? What's the minimal change you could do to solve that? So I wrote bigger, biggest there is because usually if you're in a room of developers, if you're in a room with a CEO, if you're in a room with humans, then people will start to dream up really cool answers, right? In our case, we brainstormed about, well, let's change the flow. Let's rewrite this so we have an alternative flow. And then another one was, let's integrate the grocery list page with the meal plan page. And just all these really cool sounding ideas, all of which would have taken, anywhere from a few days to several days worth of work before we could have actually started to see if it made a difference. Usually there's at least one person in the crowd, and that's this person right here, with their head tilted sideways going, I don't think so. Usually there's at least one person, it's not always the same person, who says, if the hypothesis is people don't know there's a grocery list, how about when they finish adding meals to their recipes, we pop up this really huge, ugly pop-up box that says, you're done, go see the grocery list, with a big, ugly button on it. And of course everybody, it's horrible, it's ugly, oh man, that's nasty. The point isn't to make a pretty thing, the point is to test the hypothesis. So that's the right person. So two things happen there. One is you found the minimal solution, the minimal way to test the hypothesis. The second thing is you have to let go a little bit of your ego. And this is where we've had challenges with everybody who does development, design, any creative work. The change you're about to make is not something you would want to show your mom. And it's probably not something you'd want to put on a portfolio or in your resume. The results of learning are definitely something you're going to do. But you're going to put a change out that's not that attractive. It's going to be a really stinking ugly pop-up. And no one's going to hire you as like, oh my God, what a great designer and developer. You, that's beautiful. No, it's really bad UX to do that. Obviously, we have a problem in our UX and our messaging, but this is a really good way to hack around it. So you do that, and you put your ego aside. Then we go in and we build a split test, because we never want to make a change without actually knowing that we can compare it against a baseline. So we compare existing alternative with new alternative. We do that using something called Denby. I'm not sure why I picked this guy to represent testing. Maybe because that's how I feel about testing sometimes. But when I say have a testing solution, what I'm really talking about is a split testing solution where you can start measuring alternatives. A/B testing, split testing. It's really key. We picked Vanity. There are other options out there, and you can roll your own. But I would get whatever's quickest and just start. And then you have to, one thing I wanted you guys to remember, like us, if you're like us, you'll probably start running a lot of tests simultaneously. And eventually they will start to hit each other. One test will influence the results of another test in some really weird way. And there's nothing worse than stopping all the tests and having to tease apart all the data in the system to determine, did this piece of data actually get influenced by that test? If so, how do we skew it in order to have it still be valuable? Because the data in your system is so valuable about what the user wants. That's why you have to isolate. This guy looks like a great 80s haircut, by the way. I think that's really awesome. You got to isolate your tests from each other. There is no magic I know of on how to do that. I wish I had some really great rules about that. I am sure there are great rules, I just haven't derived. And lastly, you're going to put the tests out and you're going to start measuring. We as a team, oh, and by the way, the reason I picked this one, it's like the ocean constantly flowing into the beach. The waves continually come. You are constantly and continuously deploying. We deploy after every change we've made. We package up card that's in Lighthouse for us. When we're done, we push to master. We go through automated integration tests, and we deploy it when we're happy with it. And on average, we deploy 9 times a day in a team of 2 to 3 people. At peak, we deployed 22 times a day, and that's how we do what we do. So, lastly, the site that we have it as today is the results. It's continually evolving. If you look at it the way it was a year ago, it's absolutely nothing like what it is today. And it's done by huge numbers of small steps. You can find all this material written out in more pretty prose with the same pictures on my site. And you can leave comments there that says this is really a bunch of BS if you'd like, or add something to it. And that's it. Did I get in under my time?
18 minutes.
Yeah, I did. Man, that's pretty good. You got 2 minutes. Anybody got any questions? Oh, it's so awesome. No one had a question. All right, here you go.
Do you ask, on your site, do you ask for input from your user?
You mean direct input, like qualitative feedback? What would make you
what
happy?
do you think?
Or
How can we improve
Mhm.
ourselves, whatever? Yeah.
we get, so what I've described is all quantitative, right? We also ask for qualitative feedback. There's multiple ways we've asked for them. We go through periods of having a ton of surveys. KISS Insights is a great tool. You can drop it on every page and ask a different question. It's free, and then you get to pay for it. We have the standard mechanism, customer support forums, that kind of stuff. We call customers when something weird is going on and say, what's going on? It looks really weird. What's happening for you? If we piss them off, we give them a free month. Then we bring users in and do lots and lots of ad hoc usability tests. So we blend qualitative and quantitative feedback constantly because we can't always hit enough quantitative feedback.
What do you consider sufficient feedback if you're doing like a split test with pop-up and not pop-up? Like how long do you leave that out there? When do you decide you've gotten enough feedback?
So in general, I don't get stats real well. I think I was asleep during that class. So, but the rule of thumb we use, we do 2 things. Rule of thumb is we like to get 350 people through each alternative. So that's around 700 or so. Vanity is also smarter than us in some instances, and it will tell us you have enough to be statistically significant or you don't. So it will tell us. And we don't always trust it, so we actually go back and do some math sometimes. It always seems to be right. The other thing we do that's not strictly scientific is if the difference is not at a lower total number of participants, if the difference is huge in one direction, we'll just call it and say, good enough, we'll go with the new one, or whichever one wins. If the difference is so narrow that there's, after a decent number of samples, a couple hundred total, that the difference is so small that nothing's going to make the new change that much better, we'll call it and pick one and go with it, and then iterate to try and find a better solution. So we sort of do this. We're not purists in that respect, but if you want to be purish, then it's 350 aside. Yeah.
You were talking about sort of doing this correlation. How often do you do that? Is it once a month, once a quarter?
Oh God, daily. I mean, every time that we're starting, every time we ask the question, this cycle is repeated, you know, I'm the manager, so I can say BS like that, but these guys actually do the real work.
It varies, but a few times a week.
Yeah, yeah. It's usually whenever we've finished a small batch, and for us a small batch is a couple days, and we stand back and say, how are we doing? What are the tests telling us? Are we ready to call anything? Or we call Florida for GW? You know, any of those things, we'll do it, we'll look, we'll see where the next obstacle is, we'll do all that correlation. What's going on in the background while we're doing development is the CEO is constantly going through this data, looking for correlations to try and figure out statistics we've got that one of the things that we've discovered is when we focus on an area to improve, like retention, the retention rates will start off, you know, really spiky. As we focus in an area, the spike smooths out and it becomes a controlled line because we figured out all the variables and now we're manipulating in our code. What happens is there are areas we're attacking that, you know, weeks into it, the spikiness is still there. And so he's over there slicing the data to try and separate out, well, we've got this part under control, but there's this whole other part of users that, you know, are from Michigan that are crazy and out of control, and why are they unhappy? So it's constant. It drives us a couple to 3 times a week, but there's a constant background process. Yeah, you?
Oh,
You follow up?
Yeah, I have a follow-up. So you know, my concern, I guess, would be how much of it's something where I feel like I can't afford not to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can afford to do it either.
Yeah.
So your first few times around, what kind of time sink was involved in sort of setting up this correlation part?
You know, we just do it all in Excel, right? I mean, I don't understand Excel, but he's able to, like, you know, take a set of data and another set of data and call a correlate function on it, and it says, oh, that's a 0.7 correlation. Looks like there's something there. Oh, this is a 0.1, forget it, let's move on. So for someone that gets stats in Excel, it's trivial because he just takes the MySQL data dump and goes to town with it. So that's, I think, the key, is having some data job. Now, I don't want to mess up the rest of, so I am also emceeing, and that would be wrong for me to mess up the rest of the agenda. So let me stop there. I would love to talk about this all night, and I would be happy to answer more questions later. But Marcus is going to talk next, and he's going to talk specifically some code stuff about Vanity and how we use Vanity.